Semyon Ignatyev was not a career KGB officer in the same sense as his predecessors, such as Heinrich Yagoda, Nikolai Yezhov, or Lavrentiy Beria. His path to the top of power did not lie through torture chambers and operational schemes, but through party committees and offices. He was a typical party functionary, a man of the system who rose step by step up the career ladder thanks to his diligence and unconditional loyalty. He did not seek publicity, did not make fiery speeches, and did not appear in the newspapers as a fighter against the enemies of the people. His appointment by Stalin as Minister of State Security in 1951 came as a surprise to many, as Ignatiev was known for his inconspicuousness and unquestioning obedience to any orders. It was this unassuming but methodical manner of acting that earned him the unofficial but surprisingly accurate nickname, the Silent Executioner. If Yagoda and Yezhov were public figures of the Great Terror, and Beria was the embodiment of cruel but open force, then Ignatiev acted completely differently. He was the one who carried out the leader's will without unnecessary noise or visible emotion, like an invisible mechanism setting the flywheel of repression in motion. He was like a well-oiled machine that asked no questions but simply performed its function, however terrible it might be. His silence was not inaction, but on the contrary, a sign of maximum efficiency in conditions where any delay or inaccuracy could cost lives. Ignatiev's appointment coincided with the preparation of one of the most high-profile and absurd political trials of the late Stalinist era, the Doctor's Plot. As head of the MGB, Semyon Denisovich found himself at the epicenter of this monstrous farce, personally responsible for fabricating charges against the country's leading doctors. His role was key. He had to secure confessions and gather evidence of a conspiracy that did not exist.
However, Stalin felt that the investigation was progressing too slowly. The leader, who was already extremely suspicious and paranoid at the time, demanded that the pace be accelerated and intensified. Documentary evidence has survived that paints a grim picture of the pressure to which Ignatiev himself was subjected. Once, in a fit of rage, Stalin personally threatened him, saying, "If you don't get a confession from the doctors, we'll cut your head off." Imagine this moment. The Minister of State Security, who seemingly holds the lives of thousands of people in his hands, suddenly finds himself facing his own demise. His position was unenviable. On the one hand, he had to extract confessions, and on the other, he himself was under the sword of Damocles. This threat clearly shows that Ignatiev cannot act on his own initiative out of ideological convictions or personal cruelty, but out of a primal fear for his own life. He was not the creator of evil, but merely its instrument, forced to carry out the most absurd and bloody orders in order to avoid the same fate as his victims. This episode further reinforces his image as a quiet executor who literally fought for his existence with no right to make mistakes or disobey orders. Stalin's sudden death on 5 March 1953 turned everything upside down. The wheel of repression set in motion by the leader came to an abrupt halt, and the first to be hit was Semyon Ignatiev. He was removed from his post as Minister of State Security almost immediately. The authorities, like chess pieces on a board, quickly regrouped. Lavrentiy Beria became the main player in this field, not only regaining his influence, but also merging the MGB with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, creating a powerful security agency. The new leadership of the country, represented by Beria and Georgy Malenkov, understood perfectly well that it was necessary to show the public and the party elite that new times were coming, that the era of arbitrariness was becoming a thing of the past. Ignatiev, as a key figure in the doctor's case, became the ideal scapegoat. He was sacrificed to symbolize the rejection of Stalin's methods without touching the figure of the late leader himself, who remained untouchable. In an official statement in the newspaper Pravda on 4 April 1953, less than a month after Stalin's death, Ignatiev was publicly accused of political blindness and loose talk. He was removed from all high-ranking posts and stripped of all influence. This was not just a career collapse, but a demonstration that the system capable of creating such silent executioners was now capable of devouring them itself. However, despite such a spectacular fall and public accusations, the story of Semyon Ignatyev did not end in the dungeons, as was the case with many of his predecessors. And although his career seemed to be ruined, there was always a place in the complex hierarchy of power for people like Ignatiev, demonstrating that sometimes, even after complete downfall, it is possible to find a way back. The accusation of political blindness and loquaciousness was not chosen by chance. It allowed the new leadership, not yet ready to openly criticize Stalin, to shift responsibility for flagrant lawlessness onto the perpetrators. It was a subtle but powerful signal to the entire party elite. The days when it was possible to fabricate cases with impunity were over. Ignatiev's dismissal was the first step in a series of high-profile changes designed to show the public that the country was turning towards new principles of legality. His name, which until recently had been associated with unlimited power, now served as a symbol of past excesses. In those days, when the whole country was whispering about the death of the leader, there was tense anticipation in Moscow, at the very heart of power. The offices where yesterday there was fear of the slightest delay were filled with a different atmosphere, where every step was calculated. For those who observed these events from the inside, it was obvious. The struggle for power continued, and Semyon Denisovich was merely a pawn in it, whose fate had been predetermined long before his resignation. His rapid fall, like a house of cards collapsing from a slight breeze, became a vivid lesson for all those who had grown accustomed to the immutability of the Stalinist system, opening the door to unprecedented changes. It seemed that after such a public fall, after accusations of political blindness and loose talk, Ignatiev's fate was sealed. In those harsh times, when yesterday's favorites of the leader disappeared without a trace and their names were erased from history, it seemed incredible that a man who had held such a high and sinister position could escape severe retribution. Many believed that his days were numbered and that he would join the sad list of those who disappeared into obscurity, victims of the system they themselves had served. However, history decided otherwise, giving Ignatiev an unexpected but entirely logical chance of salvation. The key to his survival was not his personal genius or special patronage, but the arrest of Lavrentiy Beria in June 1953. This event, which shook the entire country, became a turning point not only for big politics, but also for the fate of many officials who fell into disgrace after Stalin's death. When Beria, the all-powerful head of the combined MGB and MVD, was suddenly arrested within the walls of the Kremlin, his former subordinates and rivals had the opportunity to reconsider their positions. Semyon Ignatyev, who until recently had been a scapegoat and was on the brink of ruin, suddenly found himself in a completely new role. After the fall of his main opponent, Beria, who, upon becoming minister, not only removed Ignatiev, but also, in essence, began investigating his activities, Ignatiev went from being the accused to a valuable witness. For Khrushchev and his associates, who were behind Beria's arrest and sought to completely eliminate his influence, Ignatiev's testimony was invaluable. Who else but the former Minister of State Security could know the inner workings of the department, the intricacies of the intrigues and lawlessness that linked Beria to the doctor's case and other repressions? Ignatiev gave detailed testimony against Beria, revealing his role in organizing numerous provocations, falsifications, and political reprisals. He was able to talk about working methods, directives, how cases were fabricated, and Beria's involvement in torture and the extraction of confessions. His testimony was extremely important in presenting Beria not simply as an ambitious politician, but as an enemy of the people, a criminal whose actions went beyond party and state discipline. This cooperation with the investigation became a guarantee of Ignatiev's safety. The new authorities, in dire need of compromising evidence and testimony against Beria, used his information to completely destroy their powerful rival. In return, Ignatiev not only received his life, but also avoided the very highest measure of punishment that was typical of an era when yesterday's executioners themselves became victims. His experience as a party functionary, accustomed to carrying out orders without question, came in handy here as well. He worked for the investigation as quietly and methodically as he had once worked for Stalin. Unlike many who found themselves in his position, Ignatiev did not resist, did not try to defend his innocence under the old rules, but accepted the new rules of the game. He understood that in this situation, his only chance was to be as useful as possible to the winning side. His testimony became part of the very indictment that brought Beria to the dock and ultimately to his execution. Perhaps, sitting in some office and giving testimony, Ignatiev felt relief, realizing that he had escaped the fate that had befallen his predecessors and many of his colleagues. He, the silent executioner who always acted on orders, this time used his experience and knowledge of the system for self-preservation. This was not an act of repentance, but rather the pragmatic calculation of a man who knew how to survive the harshest political storms. His fate became a vivid example of how political circumstances can instantly change people's fortunes, turning yesterday's executioners into valuable witnesses and then into a silent reminder of a bygone era. After all these dizzying twists and turns, after Semyon Ignatyev played his part in the removal of Beria, he, as expected, did not return to high office or take up senior positions in the central apparatus. His political career in the capital was over. Instead, he was sent, as they said at the time, to regional exile, although it was not exile in the literal sense of the word, but rather an honorable disgrace. He held the posts of first secretary of the regional party committees, first in the Bashkir ASSR and then in the Tatar Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. For a man who had recently headed one of the most powerful departments in the country, managed thousands of employees and had direct access to Stalin, working in a regional committee, even in a leadership position, was undoubtedly a demotion. It was like moving from the center of a stormy ocean to the quiet harbor of a provincial river. It was a kind of political quarantine, an opportunity for the new authorities to keep him away from Moscow, while at the same time using his experience and knowledge on the periphery. In these regions, Ignatiev probably applied his experience as an organizer, but without his former scope and deadly force. He managed the economy and held meetings, but he was no longer part of the big Kremlin game. In 1960, when Nikita Khrushchev had already firmly established himself in power and was actively pursuing his policy of de-Stalinization, Semyon Ignatyev retired. He was granted the status of a personal pensioner of Union significance. This status was a privilege given to distinguished party and state figures, providing them with decent financial support and certain benefits. This meant that despite his past, Ignatiev was not completely rejected by the system. He was provided for, but deprived of any political influence, becoming an ordinary pensioner, albeit with special status. His subsequent life was strikingly different from the fates of many other Stalinist executioners. While Lavrentiy Beria and his closest associates were executed, and other high-ranking officials involved in the repressions were subjected to severe purges, Ignatiev lived out the rest of his days quietly in Moscow. He died in 1983 at the age of 79, escaping the harsh retribution that befell his colleagues in the punitive apparatus. His death was as inconspicuous as his tenure as minister. There were no loud obituaries, no public discussions of his role in history. He simply passed away, as if dissolving into silence.